Well, one of Vladimir Putin's justification for his invasion of Ukraine was that Kiev might attempt to join NATO and become a threat on Russia's border. That's despite membership of the Western military alliance being a distant and very uncertain possibility for Ukraine. But NATO could expand to other countries in the region. The war is giving Finland and Sweden a reason to rethink their long-held status of neutrality.
Russia's war on Ukraine has finally made Finland feel it's time to take sides.
If there is a new Iron Curtain coming into the Europe, then Finns hope to be on the western side of that curtain.
In the best-case scenario, that curtain would be Finland's 1,300-kilometer border with Russia. Worst-case scenario, Finland, which like Ukraine is outside of NATO, becomes a Kremlin target. Until the February invasion, Finns preferred this non-aligned status, having built their own powerful military with one of the largest weapons stockpiles in Western Europe and a high proportion of citizens willing and trained to fight if necessary.
We have very tough defense forces here, and we have very big reservist organization here, almost 900,000.
But now a decision on whether those assets could become NATO's northeastern flank is expected within weeks, widely predicted to be positive after a spike in public support following Moscow's attack. The Finnish parliament is debating the question of membership as the government seeks consensus before making its decision. The Prime Minister herself has reversed course from saying in January that alliance membership was not even on the table.
Our process will be quite fast. It will happen in weeks.
But the very process of seeking the security guarantees provided by the alliance has its own risks. Moscow repeatedly threatens serious political and military consequences should Finland proceed on the path towards NATO membership. And such retaliation could come while Finland waits for the 30 allied governments to accept and ratify its membership.
We are probably going to be very well prepared for different potential hybrid warfare. We're talking about refugee flows over the Finnish-Russian border, perhaps cyber attacks, the economic sanctions. The toolkit for hybrid measures is very wide, unfortunately.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has sought to reassure Helsinki.
They can easily join this alliance if they decide to apply. I'm certain that we'll find ways to address concerns they may have regarding the period between the potential application and the final ratification.
They means Finland and Sweden, as Stockholm is also reconsidering its historic opposition to joining the alliance and what it would mean to be the only non-NATO Nordic country if the Finns forge ahead.
Well, for more on this, I'm now joined by Frank Ledwidge. He's a senior lecturer on military strategy at the University of Portsmouth in England and a former military intelligence officer. Frank, we've just seen Nordic countries are seriously thinking now about joining NATO. Is that a good idea, or will that provoke Russia?
Well, first of all, from a strategic perspective, it is likely to provoke Russia, but we can put that aside. It represents, of course, a defeat on that sort of higher level for Putin. It more than doubles the length of his border with NATO, and given that one of the supposed causes of war was to push NATO back, that seems rather a setback. As you heard, both of these are formidable military powers with very impressive armed forces and defence industries. They're going to fit in very well. They'll be warmly welcomed by their new comrades. And we all have every respect for their skills and approach. And that's why, of course, as their Prime Minister said there, this is going to happen in weeks. Two other further matters that are quite interesting. One is particularly in Finland, they have a total national defence concept, a little bit like Ukraine's, except far better developed over decades. Secondly, and directly relevant to Ukraine, Finland has probably the best arsenal of former Soviet weapons. They're extremely well maintained, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're not already going to Ukraine. They soon will be.
Let's turn to the situation on the ground in Ukraine right now. Russian forces are focusing on the east of the country. How does that fight there compare to the battle in the outskirts of Kyiv?
Very interesting. Like in Kiev and in the north, the Russians are making local advances in a fairly piecemeal fashion. They don't seem to be able to develop major directed assaults. And consequently, they are having some local gains, as they were in the north. But of course, that's at the cost of attrition. And this is, as has been said before several times, or many times, now a battle of attrition. In the last week or so, the Russians have lost in the east something like 200-300 armoured vehicles that we can demonstrate. So they're taking more and more casualties on top of in the units that have already taken them in the north and in the east. They are fighting in towns now today. They've been trying to take a couple of towns around Severodonetsk, Popasne, Rubizhne. They're fighting through those now. It's not going entirely well, I would say.
Now, according to British intelligence, Ukraine's defence of the port city of Mariupol has actually exhausted many Russian units. What's your assessment of what Moscow's next moves could be?
Yes, that the Russians have involved about 12 what are called battalion tactical groups in that operation, and they are ravaged now. The idea, I think, was to fix Ukrainian forces down there, and what's actually happened is Ukrainians have fixed them. I understand there's a victory parade, Gerhard, planned for 2 weeks today in Mariupol. I don't wish to be flippant about this, but I suspect they may concern whether somebody is going to rain on that parade. It does not seem to me to be an appropriate situation for a victory parade in Mariupol. They're holding on. There's 11 square kilometres in that Azov-style complex, and the Russians are either going to have to go in and root them out or hold siege for a long time.
Frank Lebowitz, their expert on military strategy at the University of Portsmouth. Thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you, Gerhard.